Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Johnson Financial Group, helping customers build financial plans around their unique goals for over 55 years. More at johnsonfinancialgroup.com. Johnson Bank and Johnson Wealth, Inc. are Johnson Financial Group companies.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Excret Nunez. Today we'll look at how the community has responded to local law enforcement using facial recognition technology. Then we'll learn how Axe Housing helps people in Milwaukee become homeowners.
To me, the most powerful thing that I feel that they're doing is that education piece. I mean, housing is very complicated.
Plus, we'll catch up with the Wisconsin Olympian and hear about her experience at the games.
Biathlon is so popular in Europe, so it was really cool to be able to experience that with people who came over to watch the Olympics and for them to see how big and how important our sport really is, because it's not very popular in the United States.
All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Excret Nunez. Thanks for joining us today. Over the past year, the city of Milwaukee has been wrestling with the use of facial recognition technology. This is tech that some law enforcement agencies use to assist in investigations using surveillance footage. The Milwaukee Police Department has used the technology without clear guidelines in place, and community members have pushed back. WUWM reporters Eddie Morales and Jimmy Gutierrez lay out the recent battle over facial recognition technology and examine how the community has responded.
So there's a story we've been keeping an eye out for, I feel like the last year or so, which a lot of people have been following. A lot of people have been going to community meetings, speaking up in those meetings, and we're talking about FRT, facial recognition technology.
Right. So a quick explainer. FRT is basically tech that some law enforcement agencies use to assist in investigations, and that uses surveillance footage. Think security cameras, ring cams, things like that. Mm-hmm. That compares it to a database of photos like mugshots, so all to identify suspects. But a lot of agencies have used that tech without guardrails.
Right, and Milwaukee is no different, which, if we're just going to get into it, let's rewind to the Fire and Police Commission meeting from February 5th of this year.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Okay, as you can kind of hear, the room inside City Hall is packed. The hallway leading into that room is packed, and that's where I found tables set up with food and water, and that should have been a dead giveaway that this meeting would last 5 hours.
As I mentioned, we will begin with item number 1, public comment. For those who would like to speak in our...
One reason why there were so many people was because a bunch of community organizations and just regular people following this issue had circled this date. FRT was on the agenda, and Milwaukee Police Department brass would be there to talk about it.
And some background on MPD's FRT policy at the time was that we knew they had used it in the past, in a limited number of cases.
Well, that is what we thought, until Commissioner Chrissy Fung started to question police leadership.
Okay, thank you. I'm a little confused. As you mentioned, you had sent...
She asked Chief Jeff Norman about the department's past use. Then MPD Chief of Staff Heather Huff stepped in. And then finally, Fung got to Paul Lau, Department Inspector. And there was a revelation.
Okay, thank you. Just to clarify, is the practice still continuing?
As needed right now, we are using, yes.
What we learned that night is not only had MPD been using or borrowing FRT in investigations basically this whole time, they've done so without any internal procedures.
I did not know prior to just now that you guys were still borrowing FRT, and I don't think that's acceptable.
This is Bree Spencer, another FPC commissioner.
My trust is diminished. I don't think this is the right move. I feel like to me, more than the minutia of FRT, even if FRT was the best thing ever, which it's not, if the community was coming with this energy to tell me they didn't want this, then that's it for me.
So the meeting eventually ends, and the next day, big news drops.
Yeah, MPD walked back their policy, stating basically that they were putting to bed any use or conversations about FRT use by the department, for now. And that's where we are now, about 2 months after the Fire and Police Commission meeting. So we wanted to look at how this happened, which could be one of the most successful community organizing efforts in recent history. How did the community win their fight against FRT?
When we talk about community members and organizations pushing against MPD's FRT use, there is someone you should meet.
My name is Amanda Merkway, and I am the advocacy director at the ACLU of Wisconsin.
Amanda has been following the fallout of FRT in other cities for years.
Folks were faced with wrongful arrests and sometimes incarcerated for a period of time because of a false facial recognition hit.
She talked about Detroit, where there have been a number of wrongful arrests, which has cost the city in litigation and bad press. There's Robert Williams, one of the first cases, who spent 30 hours in jail for a false match. Portia Woodruff had police show up at her door, handcuff her as she was getting her daughters ready for school. At the time, she was also 8 months pregnant. Amanda says a common problem with this technology is that it's just not really good at its job, which is identifying people. And we know that there is profound racial bias.
And so it wasn't a coincidence that almost every single one of the known false matches, so to speak, from FRT that led to wrongful arrests were of Black people.
While all this is going on in Detroit, things seemed quiet in Milwaukee. That was until Amanda got a call.
An attorney friend of mine knew that I was, thinking about facial recognition and like who's using it, and sent a Court of Appeals case, a Wisconsin Court of Appeals case to me.
This is in 2024.
And they're like, hey, didn't you say that MPD has said they're like not using FRT? Well, here, it looks like they are.
This case mentioned that FRT was used in the process of an investigation. Amanda and the ACLU start to get curious. Then last year at a Fire and Police Commission meeting in April, things start to come out.
At that meeting, it was, revealed that MPD wanted to sign a contract with this private company, Biometrica, to get their own facial recognition search software. And in this pitch, MPD admitted that they had been using FRT indirectly by sending requests to other law enforcement agencies for, I think the quote from that meeting was 2 to 3 years.
2 to 3 years?
Yeah, without anyone really in the city knowing about this. And like we said, without any policy in place. In May, a month later, 11 alders send a letter to Chief Norman opposing FRT. That same month, there was an Equal Rights Commission meeting where MPD has a presentation of FRT, which was received not well. So bad, actually, that a few weeks later, the commission unanimously opposed FRT in the hands of local police. Eddie, are you tired yet?
I mean, this is a lot. But I covered that meeting and remember the agreement between Biometrica and MPD was something like 2 FRT licenses. Mm-hmm. And in exchange, MPD would share 2.5 million booking photos from Milwaukee.
Yeah, and we are still going. So in November, ACLU learns that FRT was used in 18 cases to some degree. And that brings us back to February of this year at the Fire and Police Commission meeting in the packed room where we find out that MPD has been using or borrowing FRT this whole time.
So the ACLU put in all this work to figure out if and how MPD was using FRT, the community rallies, including electeds. And finally, we get MPD's moratorium on FRT. There's someone else who was in that February meeting we should meet.
We are a 173-year-old principled organization that has stood up for democracy and supporting social infrastructure, and we will continue to be that thing.
This is Emilio De Torre, executive director of the Milwaukee Turners, the oldest civic group in the city. He says that Turners started having conversations about FRT and potential uses almost 5 years ago.
In early 2024, we began to pay more attention to the Fire and Police Commission, and we formalized our program to kind of analyze what power the Fire and Police Commission had from a supervisory point of view over the Milwaukee Police Department, the Fire Department post Act 12.
Some context is that Act 12 was this revenue sharing agreement that the city had entered with the state that, amongst other controversial issues within this act, really took away power from the Fire and Police Commission having any sort of say policy-wise for MPD.
And our commission was nationally recognized for the community control or input. So we're in this new era trying to define what this body can and can't do. Anyways, Emilio has an idea of why so many people came together over this issue and why they've been showing up meeting after meeting for the past year. He calls it a cross-pollination of concern.
Because Milwaukee is a segregated city and people have this ideological and sometimes cultural or ethnic segregation, they're aligning over issues of being righteously angry that they're being surveilled and that there's this presumption of guilt.
Personally, he also has huge concerns with how this data is being shared, not just amongst local jurisdictions, but with federal agencies.
I believe that the intention of this surveillance equipment is right there in its name. It's flock. They're implying we're sheep and we need to be shepherded. And that is anathema to what the identity of an American should be.
I mean, Emilio and other members of the Turners were at almost every FPC meeting I feel like you or I had followed over the past year. Also, should be said that FPC Commissioner Chrissy Fung works for Turner, so they have a huge connection. You know, we've spent a lot of time focusing on Milwaukee police, but there's another law enforcement agency in Milwaukee.
The Milwaukee County Sheriff's Department.
Milwaukee County Sheriff's Department, who, it turns out, has also been flirting with FRT and some of the same providers as MPD.
The sheriff's office is not necessarily subject to the same level of attention.
This is Mike Carrier. He is a professor at MSOE and also volunteers on Milwaukee Sheriff's Community Advisory Board.
It's essentially a group of community leaders who are coming together to, it's kind of in the name of it, advise the sheriff's office. There's questions asked to the committee. We can bring our own questions or concerns.
Do they have any policy power? Or is it, for lack of a better word, toothless?
Yeah, completely toothless. But this board is really new, so it's kind of all just getting figured out. Anyways, in their February board meeting, it comes out that Sheriff Danita Ball signed a kind of exploratory agreement with Biometrica, the FRT provider. Mike hears this and has questions.
Obviously led me, at least personally, to rethink, well, what had that timeline up to that February meeting actually been like? And who was notified of the decision to enter that letter of intent and who had to be? Because I'm not quite sure how this actually works.
As the meeting goes on, he says it doesn't sound like they were trying to be sneaky about this letter, but maybe they didn't see it as a big deal, which we know they were very wrong because the city is still buzzing from that Fire and Police Commission meeting. Anyways, not long after that, the Sheriff's Department announces that it is not moving forward with their relationship with Biometrica.
So it's a wrap?
It kind of sounds like it, and I asked Mike how he read that decision and if it had anything to do at all with the community organizing against MPD's use of FRT.
Yeah, and that's a really good question because I'm not entirely sure. We haven't had a meeting since that February announcement or proclamation that this letter of intent had been signed. The next meeting is on the books for March. So what's happened in between has been, for me, kind of a mystery.
So MPD's last public comment on this is their issued moratorium. The Sheriff's Department said they're not moving forward, so it seems like a win for organizers, right?
So when it comes to the Sheriff's Department, the advisory board's March meeting was canceled, so Mike won't know more about the sheriff's position until their April meeting, which is open to the public like the FPC meetings. Mike did say he thinks the police department's decision did have some kind of impact on the sheriff's decision. So it feels like community organizers and the people who have been fighting this really did make it happen, at least for now.
True, because the other thing we both heard throughout the year from MPD was that they see FRT as a, quote, useful tool for investigations. And even with the public pressure, Chief Norman has said basically in that February FPC meeting that it's almost inevitable it'll become a part of their toolkit.
And that's what Amanda Merkway and the ACLU are planning on. Emilio and Turner's too. So they're going to keep watching this. And same with the other community groups I spoke with who've been faithfully showing up to these meetings, among other groups, Milwaukee Alliance and Milwaukee for Palestine.
Yeah, I think the final thing to bring up here is that we did hear from a couple of the commissioners on the Fire and Police Commission. They said that when the public shows up and packs a room like it did earlier this year and all last year, it absolutely changes things. It changes the power dynamics. So even though the FPC has lost a lot of its power and the Sheriff's Advisory Board is there to simply advise, people showing up and speaking out does make a difference.
That was WUWM's Eddie Morales and Jimmy Gutierrez reporting. A New York Times investigation has uncovered sexual abuse allegations against Latino civil rights leader Cesar Chavez. Since then, cities throughout the country have removed or are considering removing Chavez's name from buildings, street signs, plaques, and more. In Milwaukee, a statue of Chavez at El Rey Family Market on Chavez Drive was removed. City leaders say there will be a conversation about renaming the street, and Milwaukee's celebration of Cesar Chavez Day was canceled. WUWM's race and ethnicity reporter, Taryn Powell, is joined by Marquette professor Sergio Gonzalez to talk about how we reevaluate honoring historical figures.
Let's just start with the movements that he was a part of in Latino civil rights. I can admit that my knowledge of Cesar Chavez is not extensive, but let's talk briefly about his work and how people came to center him and really honor him compared to, other leaders of the movement. Why was he so significant?
Absolutely. So Chavez has historically been recognized as one of the most important figures in two really big movements from the 1960s. One, of course, is the Migrant Farm Worker Union movement that started out of California, but had different manifestations across the United States and really put the issue of migrant farm workers in California and across the country on a national stage. The other is kind of the larger movement of Mexican-American civil rights, often referred to as Chicano civil rights of that very same period. And Chavez kind of became one of the most important figures as he was recognized across the country for his advocacy and for his effectiveness in building this broad-based social movement that became much more than this regional or California movement, but a national movement. During this period, he was kind of placed on the same stage as individuals like the Reverend Martin Luther King. He shared the stage with people like Robert F. Kennedy and was recognized for his work during that period. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, his status kind of grew nationally as he was commemorated as kind of one of the most important figures of Mexican American and Latino civil rights. And I think the fact that he has kind of assumed such a large position in the American imagination speaks to two different things. One, of course, is the fact that Latinos have grown as a population across the country, and we've been kind of trying to find ways as a nation to commemorate the history of this people. The other fact, of course, is, as you mentioned, many people might know the name of Chavez, but they might not know his history, which speaks to the fact that Americans are still doing a lot of work to catch up to understand the history of a people that have been a part of this country since before parts of this country even part of the United States.
Talk about why that kind of recognition was significant as well, him kind of being immortalized in those ways.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the fact, again, that, a lot of Americans didn't have a large Rolodex to pull from when they were thinking about important figures in American history who are of Latino descent. And Chavez would often be kind of the go-to individual. People would kind of remember his historic marches, his leadership in the 1960s and 1970s. And so everywhere from, California to Wisconsin to Washington State to Florida, when places would be named in honor of Latino individuals and Latino communities, his would be the name that would rise up. And on one hand, that kind of speaks to, of course, the importance of the farm worker movement of the 1960s and 1970s. It also speaks to the fact that sometimes local communities have not sufficiently commemorated their own Latino community's history. That's the case here in Wisconsin, of course. The fact that 16th Street was renamed after Chavez instead of the numerous individuals of Latino descent who are of importance here in Milwaukee, across the state of Wisconsin. it's really taken the work of community members and historians to better fill in those academic holes that exist, so that we're not kind of turning to a figure from a different state who was only in Wisconsin a number of times, a handful of times, for commemoration. And I think the moment that we're in right now, as Chavez's name is being taken down, as his statue is being taken down in places like Milwaukee, as is the case across the United States, it's forcing a lot of different reckonings. And I'm hoping we can talk about those. One of them, of course, is the question of whose stories and which community stories are going to be commemorated in public spaces.
That made me just think about, we just in Milwaukee, they renamed the Fourth Mineral Play area is now Clementina Castro Park. And I think that gets as recognizing, work locally, these figures that have had, equal kind of impact.
That's exactly right. You have, the Castro family has done a phenomenal job to preserve the story of Clementina Castro, and she was one of these individuals who spent her entire life advocating for Latinos on the South Side and across the state of Wisconsin. But her story might have been lost had it not been the work of her family, as well as local community members who have been trying to make sure that we recognize these individuals who played such a pivotal role in making the community what it is today. So it speaks to two different things. One is, of course, the work that we have to do as a state to better understand the history of Latinos who, I will note, have been in Wisconsin for over 100 years, have been members of the state for such a long period of time, and yet who barely register as a footnote among most of our institutional histories of this place that we love. The second thing, of course, is the constant reckoning that we have to have as a community about the way in which we decide to commemorate individuals, communities, institutions, and social movements. There are, of course, pitfalls when you decide to raise someone up to an elevated position so high as someone like Chavez, rose in the American imagination, in the minds of Latinos across the United States. Because when you place someone on a pedestal, of course, it sometimes puts blinkers on the way in which we kind of recognize not just their great achievements, but more importantly, I think in a situation like this, their faults as well.
So as we continue to talk about his name, imagery, likeness, coming down from all these things, everybody's still trying to figure out like next steps, like what do we do? Some people are even talking about renaming things after Dolores Huerta, who, of course, is one of the women who has come forward and is also co-founder of the National Farm Workers Association. What's the impact you see of taking the name, the imagery down, like if it does anything to the movement, the impact of, his work as a whole? Recognizing he also did not do that work by himself, but.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we need to view this as an opportunity to reckon with the past of a social movement, the past of a community, but also see it as an opportunity to educate a larger public. You mentioned Dolores Huerta, who played such an important and pivotal role in the creation of the farm workers movement and has continued to this day to be an important voice in advocating for Latinos in questions of immigration, economic policy, and labor rights. This is an opportunity not so much, I think, to cancel, to use kind of the terminology that we often fall into in 2026, but to rethink the way in which we want to preserve these stories. And I think most importantly, share these stories with our students, share these students with our communities. One of the dangers, of course, of building monuments, of naming streets after people is that they exist in a sense of permanence, right? If you build a statue to someone, you can't do anything to change that statue once it's there other than take it down. When you name a street after someone, it exists on a street sign, but there's not much space to have a deep conversation about who this individual was or what they represented. And so I think one of the things that communities like Milwaukee is going to have to go through, as is happening across the country, is to talk about the way in which we commemorate the history of individuals, of social movements, more importantly, of communities, whether we think that physical structures are the best way to do that, or more importantly, if they are the only way to do that. We'll never get away from the way in which we kind of commemorate history in those public ways, whether it's statues or naming sites after people. But there has to be a larger way in which we do this work so that we can have those complicated conversations. So it's not the black and white of canceling and forgetting or celebrating and putting on a pedestal. But again, to see these people as living human beings who participated in a longer stream of history, one that was being made by communities writ large, by social movements, not just one person.
Mm-hmm. And so, when we think about having these conversations in the classroom, for example, like how would you approach this with your students?
Well, we have this conversation. In fact, every semester that I teach my urban history class here at Marquette, which is centered around questions of commemoration in public space. And I think it's important because it's a conversation not just about the things that we think are important in public space, but it's a conversation about who gets to make the decisions about what gets remembered in public space. And so this can kind of expand across a broad spectrum of different topics. One is the question, of course, of statues and naming streets. The other is the questions of historic designation, which buildings get preserved. We think about the different markers that we have in public space. And so, unfortunately, the Chavez situation is part of a longer set of case studies that I would use and I will use in the future with my students. As we think about, the reckonings of 2020 and the way in which protesters in cities all across the country were demanding the removal of not only Confederate monuments celebrating individuals who were slaveholders, but also conversations that we had about the founding fathers. What does it mean to commemorate someone like Thomas Jefferson or George Washington? The conversation about Chavez is part of that longer conversation that we need to have as communities, as we think about whose history gets preserved and in what ways are we telling those stories in a way that's not static, which can really fall into the trap that happens when you have a physical documentation, but also that are fluid and that are active and that invite all of us to be a part of the conversation. The last thing that I want to note here is to really reemphasize the opportunity that this presents us, specifically as a Wisconsin community. There are so many aspects of Latino history in our state that still to this day continue to be ignored, silenced, or kind of live within the shadows of people's attics, of people's closets. And we have to think about what this opportunity offers us, how we can commemorate Latino history, and thinking about the Latino communities that deserve historical commemoration in our city and across our state. So while we're thinking about the future, not just of 16th Street, not just the statues commemorating Chavez, we should be thinking about how can we do a better job of educating ourselves about this history to make sure that all of us become better stewards of our city and our state's history.
Sergio Gonzalez is an associate professor of history at Marquette University. He spoke with WUWM race and ethnicity reporter Taryn Powell. Lake Effect is available as a podcast, so you can listen to us whenever you like. Find it wherever you get your podcasts, then subscribe, download it, and listen on demand. In about 10 minutes, we'll check back in with the Wisconsin Olympian who was at the Winter Games. But first, we'll tell you about Axe Housing and all the ways they help turn renters into home buyers in Milwaukee. That's coming up on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. You're listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Excurret Nunez. It's no secret that in Milwaukee, out-of-state investors have been buying up housing inventory to turn into rentals. That means less housing stock for people who want to become homeowners. One nonprofit is trying to counter that trend and get more Milwaukeeans owning their homes in the city. WUWM has been examining systemic housing problems and solutions for more affordable housing in our series, Seeking Solutions, Keys to Home Ownership. As part of that series, WUWM's Mayan Silver has this report on Axe Housing.
Yvette Richardson does not play when she's explaining housing basics.
Listen, I'm gonna start calling on y'all. Why is credit important?
She and Alex McCune are in a lofty, high-ceilinged event space just west of Marquette University. These two ACTS homebuyer coaches are walking 11 people through the myths of home ownership, tips on how to achieve it, and importantly, how to get finances in order.
Why is credit important? A better life. I know that's right.
Going through these 2 nights of homeowner education makes participants eligible for down payment assistance and certain loans. It then tees them up to work with an ACTS homebuyer coach who will continue guiding them through the sometimes complex process. 25-year-old Bernardo Nieto Ramirez is sitting in the front row. and he's just the kind of guy ACTS is looking for.
I guess I've rented for long enough now, and I think we want to move forward with purchasing a house now.
ACTS has been around for a long time. Ramirez watched his parents buy their first house through the nonprofit when he was 11 years old.
The requirement was that we were supposed to live there for the first 5 years, and then from there they purchased, I think the 7th year, they purchased another home, and that's currently where they reside right now.
They fixed up their first home, a duplex, and started renting it out. Now they live in Lindsay Heights. Ramirez has the basics of homeownership down, but he wants to fill in the gaps. He's curious about loan applications, getting good terms. That's exactly where ACT's homebuyer coaching can step in, says Jordan Villegas. He's a manager with ACT's coaching program.
I always recommend your first step to be meeting with a coach, because that coach will help you understand what your barriers are, what's in front of you, and break down your action steps into smaller bite-sized pieces.
That could be looking at preferred lenders, making sure people understand their loan estimates. All of these services are part of ACT's comprehensive approach to making homeownership more accessible. It has a lending arm, unsurprisingly called ACTS Lending. It helps folks that may be just outside of being pre-approved for a loan with a traditional lender. The organization has realtors and lending and home rehabbing coaches. Then there's ACTS Homes, which buys up properties that investors would typically buy. That allows ACTS to create more housing inventory, to sell to people working through their program to buy a home. Here's Villegas.
The majority of our folks have been either Black or Latino, some of the underserved populations of Milwaukee, but our doors are open to everybody.
Most people who use ACTS services are first-time homebuyers who earn 50 to 80% of the area's median income. We're talking $50,000 to $80,000 a year for a family of 3. They're the missing middle, says Chad Venn. He's director of the real estate certificate program at UW-Milwaukee's Lubar College of Business. He says it's a really important but tough population to serve.
Because at that price point, at those area median incomes, it's really hard for home builders and apartment developers to make projects work right now with all of the headwinds of the high interest rates, the high cost of labor, the high cost of building, that they're really not able to service that AMI population without some sort of like government assistance or tax credits or some affordability component.
According to a 2022 Wisconsin Policy Forum report, Milwaukee has a 28.9% homeownership rate among Black and Hispanic households. It's the lowest combined rate among the 11 peer cities Milwaukee was included with. ACT's comprehensive approach reduces those barriers to homeownership. They coach families on how to raise their credit scores, pay off debt, and create budgets. They can help people apply for grants through the city, county, federal, and other sources to get up to $10,000 of down payment assistance. And ACTS Lending can provide loans of up to $200,000 without requiring a minimum credit score. ACTS is funded primarily by philanthropy, in addition to grants and some city and federal support. In addition to helping home buyers, ACTS also works with home sellers, people like Chad Venn.
My family and I reached out to ACTS Housing a few years ago when my grandmother had passed away. And my grandmother, she lived on the south side of Milwaukee in the same house for 70 years. And that house was part of, where my father grew up and my aunts and uncles grew up. And when she had passed away, my family felt it was pretty important that we wanted to pass down some of that legacy. And so, my mom and dad and my uncles were inclined to try to find somebody that wanted to live in that house similar to what they did.
Houses in Venn's grandmother's neighborhood were being snapped up by investors who were turning them into rental properties. His family didn't want that. So Venn contacted ACTS and negotiated for the nonprofit to buy the house at a lower rate than if it was an open market transaction.
They worked on doing some subtle improvements to the building, and then they ended up selling to one of their ACTS home buying clients that had kind of gone through the education process.
Over the past 3 decades, ACTS has helped more than 4,000 individuals and families buy homes. People generally stay in their homes, and a smaller percentage eventually sell. Very few have foreclosed. The median current ACTS homeowner who purchased before 2023 has earned more than $72,000 in total equity. That's as they pay monthly housing costs that ACTS says on average are 2/3 of what they'd be shelling out to rent an equivalent home. ACT's impact has increased steadily over the decades. About 1/3 of their home buyers purchased their homes in the 2020s. But still, they can't help every would-be homebuyer in need of support. Deetra Kemp, VP of Impact at ACTS, says they're limited by capacity, both in terms of staffing and in terms of housing on the market.
Internal capacity, for sure, but also it's, we can only create so much capacity within the market. We've already lost thousands of units, and we're only capable of clawing back 100 a year. So there's work to be done, for sure. There's a lot of work to be done.
In the meantime, it's wise to keep focusing on education and homebuyer coaching, says Ven.
To me, the most powerful thing that I feel that they're doing is that education piece. I mean, housing is very complicated. It's not as simple as, I want to go buy a house. It's part of it is making sure that you're in a financial position to be able to do it and that you understand all the implications that come with it.
Back in the near west side, Bernardo Nieto Ramirez has completed his homebuyer education course. And Alex McCune is handing out graduation certificates.
Bernardo Nieto Ramirez, you gotta come up here.
Nieto Ramirez grabs the certificate, returns to his seat.
He gonna be the one, I can tell. He gonna be the one. Ready to roll. Congratulations.
Hopefully, on the path to follow in his parents' footsteps and buy his first home. Maayan Silver, 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.
Support for Seeking Solutions, Keys to Home Ownership, comes from presenting sponsor, Educators Credit Union. You can check out all our series coverage at wuwm.com/housing.
Still to come, we'll check in with the Wisconsin Olympian who competed in this year's Winter Olympics. We'll hear about her experience and how she performed at the Games next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. This is Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Excret Nunez. Back in January, we spoke with Olympian and Army National Guard Staff Sergeant Deidre Irwin before she headed to the Games in Milano Cortina. Irwin, who's from Pulaski, Wisconsin, was excited to compete in her second Olympics as a biathlete. Irwin competed in a total of 5 events. But now that it's over, she took some time to speak with Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski about her Olympic performance and her memories from Milano Cortina.
I'd love to hear more about your experience at the Milano Cortina Olympics. I guess let's start at the beginning. I know there's probably so much to cover, so much you experienced, but as a viewer, I always love watching the opening and closing ceremonies. So were you able to enjoy and be a part of the opening ceremony as an athlete?
This time, I decided not to go to the opening ceremony. We were in a pretty remote village that wasn't one of the remote villages that was having the opening ceremonies. But I kind of wish I would have gone now. We would have been able to go to Cortina, and I saw Snoop Dogg there, and I was like, oh no, I missed my chance.
Oh no.
So I was a little bummed about that. But I mean, I was racing in the first race a couple days later, so I wanted to make sure I was ready for that. So I missed the opening ceremonies this time, but I made sure to go to the closing because when else am I going to be able to go walk through that beautiful Coliseum in Verona. And it was a really cool experience. I got a selfie with Diplo and Major Lazer. So that was pretty cool.
Incredible.
It was one of those, like, I'm going to look back on that picture in like years and be like, what was that?
Right. Was this my life at one point?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the logistics, especially when you have to race, like as soon as things kick off. So where were you staying primarily, and what was kind of your mindset? How were you feeling physically going into that? Because there's so much traveling for your sport. So how did you try and prep yourself up for success?
Yeah. I mean, we pretty much did the whole second trimester of the World Cup. And then I had maybe a week and a half before the Olympics, started. And we spent some time adjusting to altitude in a couple valleys over from Antholz in a valley called Ridenown. And it was super nice, beautiful, great snow. But yeah, I was pretty tired from the second trimester of racing. And I think also a little like nervous, excited for the whole Olympic lead up and everything. So I got to Antholz maybe 3 or 4 days before opening ceremonies. And so we were in a really remote location. The only sport at our village, you could call it, was biathlon. So we had a couple of hotels in town that were, I guess, essentially the official Olympic village, but our team decided to get like what we call as our Olympic house. We had like an Airbnb that we were all staying in with our own chef and everything, really trying to mitigate sickness exposure, which is so important for our sport. And also just making sure we're eating food that we're comfortable with, food that we like, working pretty much on staying consistent to what we've done in the past. And so that was super nice, although a really different Olympic experience than in the past, being in the village and everything like that. So I definitely feel like I missed out a little bit on that, but it was also super nice to have all the comforts that we were used to. A chef that we've worked with in the past. We even taught him how to make tacos one night. So that was really cool. Watching an Italian chef cook tacos was really entertaining. But yeah, I mean, it was a different experience for sure doing the remote villages, but something I think that's going to be pretty common for Olympics going forward, because there's so much usefulness and environmental greatness about using venues that already exist, using, infrastructure that already exists, and not having to build everything like they did in Beijing and in Pyeongchang and most venues before that. So yeah, it was a different type of Olympics, but I really enjoyed how Milan Cortina pulled it off. I was still able to go up to Cortina, and I got to walk through the Olympic Village and go to like where they were handing out the golden Corona bottles, and I got my like face etched onto a Coca-Cola can, and I got to experience a little bit of like the Olympic Village for a day, which was really cool. So yeah, just a little different than Beijing, but honestly, it was kind of nice.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because Beijing, obviously, you can't really compare it to anything. It was a very unique period. It was during the pandemic. So, extra precautions, not the typical Olympic Village experience that we as viewers see or get inside looks into, right? But with your opportunity to be in Cortina for a bit, or even in your remote section where you were housed at for the most part, how was the energy? I imagine there's still just more people. There's actual spectators this time. What was it like to take that in?
I mean, Antholz is a biathlon mecca of fans and people who love biathlon and love watching our sport. And so I think a lot of people were surprised to hear that we had the most attended sport, that we had the biggest stadium, that we had the most fans. But I wasn't surprised because it's like every weekend for us. Biathlon is so popular in Europe. So it was really cool to be able to experience that with people who came over to watch the Olympics, and for them to see how big and how important our sport really is, because it's not very popular in the United States. So being able to have, my command team from WCAP came, and they got to sit in the stadium and they got to just see how big and how much, fans and everybody loves our sport, and really just like what it is to experience biathlon as spectators. And then for me as athletes, being able to have my family there, hearing my fiance in the crowd, losing his voice, screaming for me.
Where you're like, I can't pick that person out. I know who that is.
It was crazy. It was such a surreal experience to be able to hear him and my brothers in their little section just cheering for me. So it was a really incredible, for me, Olympics with my family and with all of the spectators, with all the people who really just love biathlon. It was really unique. It was really incredible to see how many people came out. And then, like I said, talking with NBC after and and having them experience the bigness of biathlon, and I hope a lot of people back home saw that and they saw, how passionate we are. And, even though we didn't get any medals this Olympics, how close we are and how we're fighting to compete against those bigger nations over in Europe. So it was a really, really amazing experience.
Well, let's go through some of the events. And I'm speaking as not a biathlete, but as a spectator, as a fan of watching the Olympics and sports. And I say y'all did great. I mean, you're still placing pretty much top of the pack, right? And there's so many people who race. And you did 5 events total, including a mixed relay to kick things off where you secured 14th place. Now, was this your first mixed relay in an Olympic game?
Yes.
How was that for you?
It was really cool. I mean, I think actually every person on our team, it was their first Olympic mixed relay. So we had a very, young team to experience that Olympic pressure. And I think we all handled it as best as we could. We had, a little bit of rough time on the range for a couple athletes, but I mean, that's just the Olympics. Everybody wants it so bad. They want to perform at their highest. And sometimes that pressure really gets to you, especially in a sport like biathlon where the range means so much. So yeah, it wasn't our best result of the season, but I think that for all of us being our first Olympic mixed relay, it was a really cool experience. And our team was really strong, and sometimes it doesn't always come together. So I'm really happy that after the Olympics, we had another shot at the mixed relay, and we did prove ourselves. We ended up getting on the podium for the first time ever in Otapa at a World Cup. And so, it just goes to show you that, we had the right team on the start line that day. We just missed a few targets and weren't really clicking. So it was a cool relay to be a part of. And, hopefully I get picked for the next one at the next Olympics.
Yeah. It's impressive how many events you're doing. Some athletes go for their specialty right and they're done after that, but you are competing consistently. And the second event was the 15-kilometer individual. So can you walk me through how that race went and how you were feeling going into this race, especially since people knew you as one of the top finishers for Beijing? So how were you trying to set up your mental health in a way or your mindset going into that race?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think I had a little more pressure on because I had such a good result in the last Olympics. But, I've had a lot of racing since then. So it felt pretty normal. So going out, getting good splits from my coaches, knowing that I was skiing really well, knowing that, for the most part, for half the race, I was in the same position I was in last time, fighting for a top 10. Unfortunately, then all it takes is one stage where you miss 2 more shots and then kind of out of the mix for that. But I was really proud of that race. It's really hard to shoot 19 for 20 or 20 for 20 every single time in that race. So being able to shoot 17 for 20 and still get in the top 40. And I think that day I had a top 15 ski time. So there were a lot of really good elements to that race for me and still something I'm really proud of for sure. And I can only control my performance out there, and everybody else just had really, really great days.
Well, and you said biathlon is this sport where every race is going to be different, and you're just working on those baseline consistencies. But let's give a shout out to your shooting performance in the 7.5 kilometer sprint. You did a flawless 10 out of 10, which led you to then qualify for the 10 kilometer pursuit. How often does a 10 out of 10 happen? Not simply for you, but for anyone in a biathlon.
It doesn't happen often. I'll say that, especially for me going into this season, it really rarely ever happened. But I think that's something, that shows, my growth and why, I really can't be upset with my Olympic performances because especially with the added pressure of the Olympics and able to shoot 10 out of 10 in that race I feel like is one of the hardest ones to shoot 100% because every second counts and everybody is really always performing at their highest. And it's our shortest race that we do as an individual. So yeah, I was super proud of that one. And that was the one where I was going for shot 8, 9, and 10 in my standing. And I could hear my fiance and my brothers just cheering for me. And so when I hit that last shot and hearing that little group of guys really going crazy, it was such a cool experience and definitely a memory I'll never forget. It was so cool. And yeah, to be able to say I cleaned the sprint at the Olympics is really incredible. And I think this season, including the Olympics, I cleaned 5 out of my 7 sprints that I did. And so, just shows, like I said, all the work I've put in the past 4 years. And maybe it wasn't the best results at the Olympics on paper, with whatever my rank was, but it was definitely a really cool experience to see my growth and see my consistency throughout the years.
Absolutely. Well, we'll be looking forward to seeing you race more and more and more. And for today, I want to thank you so much, Deidre, for joining me and sharing what this wild ride has been like for you.
Oh yeah, it's been incredible, and the support from back home has been amazing. I had so many people text me that they were like, "I heard you on Milwaukee NPR, so cool!" Like they were like not expecting at all to like turn on the radio and hear my voice. So super cool. And so hello to all those people. Thanks for supporting me, loving me, and pushing me to be the best I can be.
Staff Sergeant Deidre Irwin is a 2-time Olympian from Pulaski, Wisconsin. She joined Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski to talk about her experience as a biathlete at the Games. You can listen to more of their conversation at wuwm.com. That's Lake Effect for today. I'm Excurette Nunez. Audrey Nowakowski, Joy Powers, and Sam Woods join me in producing Lake Effect each week, with help from Graham Thomas. Becky Mortensen is our executive producer, and Emily Files helps edit the show. We also heard from Taryn Powell, Mayan Silver, Eddie Morales, Jimmy Gutierrez, and Catherine Kokel from the WUWM news team this week. Jason Reeby is our studio engineer. Valeria Navarro Villegas is our digital operations manager. Trepper Shep wrote our theme music. If you missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at wuwm.com. And if you want to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Join us again on Monday at noon, and we'll help you get ready for Tuesday's election and tell you what's at stake. Thanks so much for joining us today on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.